When a remake like Silent Hill 2 is made, it divides people. You'll have those clinging on to what they consider a timeless masterpiece, and others who will pick up this dust and cobweb-ridden monstrosity and say it's in desperate need of modernization, whether that be through the story, the gameplay, or the graphics. Now, it's common for die-hard fans of the original to just want a reskin, maybe a few quality-of-life improvements in the gameplay, and that's it. A next-generation remaster rather than a full-blown remake that is essentially just an update to keep every bit of the magic of the original intact. Because it's a hard undertaking for both the developers and the fans to take something so unique, whose notoriety stems from that uniqueness, and try to view it through a new lens. But what happens when it's good, though? When a development team takes one of those lenses, stomps it to death, and the end result is something new and beautiful to behold? What happens when you take two games that also end in the number 2, lock them in a dark room with no contraceptives, and they produce a worthy gameplay offspring? Do you create something that can enhance or even surpass what the original set out to do, or did you strip away the essence of what made it so special? Today, we will discuss it. In a world full of meaningless arguments and comparisons that do nothing but put a wall of divisiveness between us, I'm here to add another brick to the wall. Two amazing games at the mercy of opinions. Can the fog clear and show us who's the authority on which is better? Could it be me? Sure as shit ain't, but for now, let's pretend. Remember, there are no winners here, except for the game I pick at the end. The classic Silent Hill 2 versus the modernized Silent Hill 2-2. A lack of resources versus perhaps too many. Flight or fight. Atmosphere versus the jump scare. Silent but deadly versus the audible fart. Can the charming and stoic original stand the test of time, or will the action-packed remake stomp it out with brute force? Silent Hill 2. Boy, the general opinion changed on this game fast. From whining over shadows on a character's face and one not being dirty enough, to casting a massive shadow of positivity, and shitting on anyone who doesn't think it's squeaky clean. As an OG fan who finds Silent Hill 2 to be his spirit animal, the idea of giving it sharp teeth and claws and letting it loose out of my spirit and into modernized reality seemed a little daunting at first. But once I realized I don't give a single shit because it's a video game, do with it what you want, I started to feel better. It's impossible to remove the original from our memories. The remake proves that with all the ways it honors it. But instead of just simply copying and pasting and becoming an ever-filling sack shooting fan service loads all over the place, the remake silently tries to create its own identity. And in doing so, was that the secret to get it to the top of the hill? Let's talk about it. Let's see these towns in our restless dreams. Story, gameplay, graphics, etc. Let's dive into an abyss of bullshit. The story. The category all categories and subcategories are drawn to. It was an amazing story then, and it's an amazing story now. End of story. Goodbye. Thanks for watching. But yeah, it's the same. Nothing has shifted drastically, the characters' stories are all for the most part untouched, and we reach the same conclusion by the end. So your opinion on which does the story better will likely just depend on how each game tells it, which voice acting performances you prefer. Do you prefer the fun, quirky, and unsophisticated acting of the past, or the calm, serious, trying your best to be subtle and real acting of the modern age? I think it's safe to say the general consensus, without even me researching it, is that most fans of the original will prefer the original, but that's not where the conversation ends. Regardless of how I felt when I first played the opening of the remake, upset that it didn't reflect the same unique emotions brought out of me from the original, like I said in that video, and this is something I knew people would ignore, I more than appreciate some of the original ways this game goes about telling its story. When approaching it, it's really easy to just give us the same shit. This is a remake after all, don't fix what isn't broken, give us the same characters, the same lines, the same scenes, and call it a day. And that's an approach that doesn't always work out in your favor, but what else can they do? When the template you're working with is one of the most iconic horror games of all time, and some of its main driving factors as to why it's considered that are its story and acting performances, how do you go about painting over a perfect picture? one of the most quotable games of all time, where every fucking cutscene is a gem with a memorable line, or 20. As an actor, how do you go about redefining such unique characters, giving your own stamp of creativity to the portrayal and honoring it at the same time? As a player, how do you unlearn 20 years of knowing how a story is told and how characters deliver their lines, and not just sit there staring at the screen waiting for your favorite one, and if it's not up to your standard, you're going to be disappointed. But Bloober Team and company roll with the handicaps they have to suffer by default and impressively manage to achieve the impossible, for the most part. The voice acting from the original can seem ridiculous, robotic, and disconnected from reality, but that was the whole point, to sound like fucking weirdos. To create this creepy world where you're constantly feeling uneasy. A cast of characters speaking like the words missed a step in their brain before being spoken, or like they're letting an underdeveloped AI version of themselves talk, but part of their conscious is still trapped within. It's very fucking interesting. This isn't just about a bunch of normal people that are victims of a haunted town riddled with monsters. It's about meeting people in town who are essentially haunting themselves and manifesting monsters that reflect their innermost guilt and torment. It's hard to paint them as victims or villains because all of their stories are riddled with tragedy, yet their demeanor comes off questionable. Like a sleeping giant that you don't want to risk poking but can't help but poke because it's entertaining. In the remake, the characters have more of a grounded feel. Don't get me wrong, they stay true to the original and the uncertainty surrounding them is still done well, just in a less mysterious way that's just not as entertaining for me. All the lines have less oomph to them. They're not goofy as fuck anymore, which makes them less memorable, and emotional undertones are a lot more visible. So in the case of recreating the original magic of the first, I consider it a failure. But who cares, because that's not the only thing worth striving towards with this game. I expected it. My hope was the remake would counteract the lack of goofiness with some powerful, realistic depictions of inner turmoil. Some strong, emotionally driven shit that could take a massive trauma dump on me and have me submit to its glorious repulsiveness. And unfortunately for me, this game kind of fails in that respect too. But it's really interesting because where the characters and story start to lose me in the remake is actually when they get closer to their original form. For me, this game's strongest moments, both in written dialogue and story structure, is when it separates itself from the original almost completely. It's where exploring these characters in a more grounded and realistic way pays off for me, like the added cutscenes with Maria, the new cutscene with Eddie in the theater, the new final dialogue between Mary and James on the roof, Laura calling James a fart face. Speaking of grounded, Laura, you are so grounded for that. And the change to the close-up shot of your face calling James a killer as opposed to the wide shot in the original makes me want to Angela TV spike your fucking head. But anyways, yeah, grounding, bare feet in the grass. I originally hated how much emotion could be read in James's facial expressions in the new opening, despite them changing it from the reveal trailer. But throughout the game, I grew to love how the little nuances in his performance can help elevate a scene. His more grounded reactions make him more relatable as a main protagonist and makes me feel for his confusion a little, instead of how in the original I was confused by him but didn't feel for him, which made the remake feel fresh and interesting. This should be reserved for graphics talk, I guess, but the emotions and characters' facial expressions this time around help showcase what could be going on beneath the surface. Shocker. But it's in a nice and subtle way. Like the way James eyes the drink in the Heaven's Night cutscene, or for Eddie in the theater when James says, "So you got your appetite back?" And you could see Eddie's face like, "You fucking cunt, you're calling me fat, aren't you?" Showing just a tidbit of how much he hates being judged by people and how he's constantly self-conscious of his eating habits. It's the subtle shit like this that stands out for me, and the fact that these examples come from cutscenes that were non-existent in the original shows just how much being a crybaby nostalgia hunter and waiting for iconic lines can get in the way of me immersing myself in the remake. But that doesn't change the fact that they sometimes get in the way from an objective standpoint. Things like Mary's "Anyway, what do you mean anyway?", Eddie's "A corpse can't laugh," and good God, pretty much every time Angela's on screen. Angela, oh Angela, my beloved troubled woman-child, perhaps my favorite character in the original, I don't care if you think this is bias, I can't sugarcoat this, is absolutely fucking butchered in this remake. And it's a shame because the abstract daddy boss fight is the best in the game for me, and I can't wait to try and talk about it in detail later. But Angela has every bit of emotion stripped from her in the worst way. She sounds like an actress that just got pulled off the street or got the job from knowing someone involved with the game, and they said, "Hey, have you ever been depressed before? Did you ever have an emo phase? Do you dress unconventionally and smoke pencil-thin joints in a messy room and think about how no one understands you? Because nobody gives a shit. Can you act sad and confused on camera? Action." And this is where nowadays comments will come out the woodwork like, oh, the actress in real life has gone through some real traumatic shit. You're a fucking horrible person for judging her. She was raped and murdered and brought back from the dead as a fucking double-legged mannequin. This is why she resonates with a trauma-suffering character. I don't give a fuck, dude. Every single cutscene with her, I'm cringing so hard because I don't believe a single fucking word that comes out of her mouth. And it's not in the good Silent Hill way, like, oh, you're supposed to be confused, bro. Unreality. No. It's fucking annoying. It's terrible. And it rips me out of the scene every single time. Does she have some semi-decent line delivery at times? Yes, but it's at random and is so weighed down by how awful and deadpan she is that these few moments of, if you could call them triumph, don't mean shit at the end of the day. Sorry if you disagree, but go fuck yourself. She sucks. You want my thoughts on Silent Hill 2 Remake story and characters in a nutshell? It's literally, hey, pretty good, not too shabby, but Angela fucking sucks. The only time I can stomach her is Surprise, the one cutscene that doesn't exist in the original with her. Because this game should have just given the middle finger to fans and placed their own flag on top of the Silent Hill, and pierce it through the dying corpses manifested from the hopes and dreams of fans wanting a 100% faithful adaptation. Again, I love when this game throws you off by changing the original structure of cutscenes, the locations, the structure of when certain lines pop up. The jukebox scene is fucking genius, inserting music from the actual OST into the story, as a way of helping James remember Mary and their memories by the lake. It was perfect, and I don't understand why this same story tactic isn't used more throughout the game. It would have been great to essentially lure the player into a false sense of hope that James is a really good guy, or that Mary is still alive. It would be a way to separate the remake from the original without abandoning the story in its entirety. I like the little side folktale of the Lady of the Light, a story with obviously many ties to James and Mary. It's new, it's creative, and it's fitting Maria is the one who brings him to the statue and tells him the story. The extra time spent with her, both in and out of cutscenes, helped me become more attached to her, along with how her intentions, while still clearly a little deceptive, aren't as amplified and deliberate as the original. She's no longer screaming, "Fuck me!" and "Protect me, you worthless turd!" anymore. Now it's more like, "Hey, big guy. You want to be my knight in shining armor?" It's subtle, it's sexy. And again, it's playing into the idea of drawing the player into a false sense of security, which is a major part of James's character. Now it places us in his shoes, whereas the original feels more like you're an observer, which could be a deciding factor in whether the remake appeals to you more. But unfortunately, none of these changes really lead to anything substantial, because the game is still trying to hit all its necessary beats to honor the original story and not tell a completely reimagined version of it. I do enjoy the time loop aspect being explored more though. There's some people who theorize that every ending of the game is canon, so in this remake all the little notes scattered throughout seemingly written by a past James warning a future James are a nice little nod to that theory. It's fun info to play with. Again, it's crazy how initially going into this remake I was standing all postured and pretentious with my "they better do this right" checklist waiting to check off boxes. But by the time the game was over, at least with the story portion, I realized I had the wrong fucking list. Shit, what else can I do to drag this out? Let's do a quick character check and then I'll wrap up who wins story. The characters in the original are fucking perfect, so there isn't much to talk about there. But I do have some pretty divisive opinions that I'll get to in a second. Angela still fucking sucks and I'll never get over it. I like Eddie for the most part in this remake. His character is one of the ways the new approach to the line delivery works. He comes off the most innocent out of anyone in his introduction scene, and simultaneously the most scary in his scene in the theater. I love this dynamic. Prison scene had a shittier delivery of "put the gun to their head, pow," but the rest of it plays out great. There's good tension. But the bigger they are, the harder they fall, cause I'll be a nitpicky asshole and send this fat fuck rolling down the hill he just worked so hard to ascend. His pre-boss fight cutscene just wasn't the perfect slice of pizza it once was. The initial cheese pull looked promising, but once "the corpse can't laugh" line happened, the walking corpse of a man named me let out a chuckle and punched the screen harder than James punched Eddie in the face. And then the cheese flopped to the floor. I like the idea of James initiating the fight, but Eddie not immediately shooting him and instead running away to wait for his boss fight to start made no sense to me. Still, I fucking like Eddie, solid B. Laura, you fucking Alita battle angel looking cunt. She's alright. It's kind of the exact situation as Maria, where her more grounded nature makes the interactions with James more interesting. Again, it's about that tipping scale of amped up entertainment or toned down humanization. Speaking of which, James and Mary/Maria. I like the remake versions better. I'll even go a step further to piss OG diehards off and say I like Maria's new outfit better as well. I won't go through every one of their cutscenes of the game and compare and contrast, because then it would showcase some of the shittier aspects of both and make me look like an idiot, and I believe the endings more than justify my reasoning. By the way, the endings in the remake are way better in that they show a lot more context. Even though the original Mary's Letter still slaps, remake wins the endings battle. But the scenes on the rooftop, specifically in the Leave and In Water endings, are way more satisfying and raw. Because the whole point in the end is James is snapping out of his bullshit, right? The Silent Hill curse of sounding like a robot is coming to a close. So confronting Maria at the top like he's a prepubescent schoolboy standing up to a bully for the first time feels a little ridiculous in the original. The way James and Mary, in quotations, embrace at the top in the remake made me feel more sad at the situation than anything the original did. The ending is the perfect time for the raw and real to shine to give the remake a boost, because I don't need you anymore. And it's time to end this nightmare. Just doesn't hold a candle to, I'm sorry, but I don't need you anymore. It's over. She's gone. It makes Maria's anger, which isn't on full display as much this time around, hit so much harder, and the switching of Mary's face to Maria's with the lips and eyes and shit is epic as fuck. So that about wraps up whatever I can catch in my ever-flowing river of thoughts. But who's the winner? Let's make this fun and line up the strengths and/or weaknesses and come to a conclusion. Do what my incessant rambling could have done easily however many minutes ago. Let's go to the versus board. The original has voice acting that's more cohesive with the themes present within the game, but does it come at a cost of the voice acting sounding too robotic and ridiculous? The remake has raw and realistic character depictions with more visible emotions. These help to ground the story and humanize it. But does this take away too much of the charm as a result? And can it make up for that with a more compelling take of the story? The original has more memorable lines and line delivery, but the remake has superior endings. The original has nostalgic charm and simplicity. The remake has an expanded story through in-game dialogue with Maria, as well as multiple added cutscenes. Judging off of what we have so far, it seems like the scales are at a standstill. Both games in their own right have unique strengths going for them. But all it takes is inserting this f***ing bitch, and we have our answer. Any chance the remake has on the story front of shocking us with a worthwhile adaptation and getting us to submit is effectively ruined by this emotionless drag of a character that does nothing but diminish everything around her. Despite standing on a staircase of flames, she comes out half-baked, ascending stairs when she should be pushed down them. Ruins, who is perhaps the greatest character in the original, wasting so many iconic scenes to the point that it has to be the deciding factor in the major L she just earned for the remake team. Wow, how sad. The remake seems to be on the ropes already, but let's see if it can bounce back as we move on to round 2, gameplay. Gameplay, the thing that will have you screaming blasphemy at the gameplay reveal trailer. How can you call yourself Silent Hill 2 if you don't have fixed camera angles, tank controls, and put a big emphasis on action? Boycott the game. But this has some legitimacy, and isn't just a bunch of old millennial farts reminiscing about how games used to be so much better when they sucked, where you were more limited in your capabilities. But the original Silent Hill 2 is a game that thrives on how well all its elements converge to support the theming. The gameplay is no exception, because fixed camera angles leave you blind as a bat and tank controls are uncomfortable. Regardless if you're an apex nerd of old horror games with tank controls, they are still by default more difficult to control. It's like stick shift versus automatic, and that's why I didn't use them in the original and instead opted for 2D controls. Thank you very much. But even with them, you're still at a beautiful disadvantage. Every time the camera slowly shifts its focus or abruptly switches, like when entering a new area, it's an obstacle. It can be really disorienting. You'll feel lost, like a helpless, drunken mess trying to find your hotel room. And that's great. It's that lack of control, that instability that makes the experience. This game being old also helps in that your movements are more robotic looking, peppering in that empty, soulless feeling. The enemies are more unsettling rather than an actual threat, but because of the atmosphere when you're in dark, spooky areas looking at the map or menuing, with that fade to black in between and the volume turning down to 0, it'll have you think for a second, like, what if now is the time some shit is actually gonna come out and jump scare me? It's a game of constant foreplay where the thing you think is jerking your chain never actually comes. It's creating the illusion of danger, and wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what the fuck Silent Hill 2 is all about. It's about lingering on the what-ifs, the fear of the unknown, true psychological horror. So if that's the case, then how the hell is the remake supposed to bounce back when it's primarily doing the exact opposite, putting you in a massive jump scare funhouse and letting you play whack-a-mole with monsters? I said it's on the ropes, and immediately, not even a minute into the second round, it's getting pummeled with shots against the turnbuckle? What the hell are we even doing here? I'll tell you what, playing a good game. To me, it feels like a mixture of Resident Evil 2 Remake and Last of Us. Resi with the shooting, and The Last of Us with the way melee combat feels. All the dodging and swinging just has the same flow for me. If you think The Last of Us comparison is a bit of a far reach, well, get ready to give me a reach around when you take a look at the main menu before and after you complete the game. Ha! Well, that has nothing to fucking do with the gameplay, but I rest my case. The melee combat is for me the best part of the game, or at least it's what sticks with me the most because it took up about, 89% of my fucking playthrough, but with good reason. If you're already throwing legs in my face, I'm not gonna waste my time shooting my shot. Get ready for a major piping. Okay, enough with the bullshit. The combat is satisfying as hell, no matter how much action wasn't a part of the original experience. Does it interfere with the structure of the story and cutscenes when in between James is like a horror action hero fighting his way through hordes of monsters? Yeah, sort of. Does the third-person, over-the-shoulder camera angle strip away some of the ambiance that again feeds into the story beautifully in the original? Yeah, sort of. But they go for a different approach here that, once again, I ain't mad at. Being able to initiate a panic attack out of James at any moment after killing an enemy is the #1 reason this combat works for the story. Because you have to do it. That's what keeps the enemy down, right? You have no choice. You're a bad person. The over-the-shoulder camera angle builds upon this, putting you in James's shoes, which in this version of the story lines up with his more relatable character portrayal. And being that the game throws so much combat at you and beating an enemy when it's down is what keeps it down, it's impossible to avoid hearing his passionate grunts that tell a story all by themselves. The story of the new Silent Hill 2. The new James, from a depressing, unnerving yet ethereal escape to being relentlessly bullied and turning into a murderous psychopath. It's like all the added combat is a manifestation of James's guilt closing in on him, reminding him he's a piece of shit every 5 seconds. Am I going too deep to defend this shit? Nah, I don't think so. The action is so great that it had me wishing they were going to throw a curveball in the end and have the videotape be James beating Mary to death with a steel pipe in the hospital. I just couldn't bear to see you suffer. Beats the living shit out of her on the hospital bed. But forget the story perspective, how about the game perspective? It's really fun. Combat-wise, the dodging can feel a bit tricky, but once you memorize each enemy's 2 or 3 attack patterns, it's pretty easy. They do have retaliations to mix you up, but thankfully you can dodge out of most attack animations, which is beautiful. Loading up that final swing you know is going to set an enemy up for the kill never got old for me. It's legit one of the most satisfying finishers I've ever come across in gaming. I can't really speak about gunplay because I only used it for bosses or mobs of enemies that demanded I use a gun. It was basically only used as a get out of jail free card, or an okay, I've had enough pipe swinging, let's just move this along card. I saw a video titled, "Is Silent Hill 2 Remake Overcooked?" And the answer is yes. I couldn't think of a better way to somewhat negatively describe this game. We're going to revisit this idea multiple times throughout the next 2 categories, but I'll just get this out of the way and say, overcooked? Yes, but it's not an inedible pile of ash. I'd say it's golden brown with some black spots, and that's still tasty to me. Is there a shitload of enemies in this game? Yes, and because of that most people might find the combat becomes redundant. Good thing I'm not most people. I'm a big fan of the combat in Hellblade 1, and that game was what repetitive combat is all about. It has you doing the same shit the entire game with, as far as I remember, no unlockable melee variations and very few enemy variants. And then in the end it has you face like an onslaught of 1,000 of them. If you give me combat with smooth animations and some weight to them, I'm good to go. If you add unnerving sounds of pipe-slapping meat and bone mixed with unsettling cries of pain to that, I'm moving in. If you multiply that by 10,000, I'm closing the door for a bit, locking it and hiding the key in a shit-filled toilet. Slapping meat is good, up until you do it 10,000 times, then it just starts to hurt. It's not agonizing pain though, because again, the melee combat here is some of my favorite ever. I don't know how to describe this shit without risking me repeating myself 10,000 times. Silent Hill 2, it's overcooked but still tasty. It's tasty gamer food, but there's just enough to make you feel a little bloated. And it's not like they're just adding more locked doors this time around. The game likes to put walls between you and key items using combat encounters, quite frequently. And sometimes in a game that has fairly simplistic gameplay mechanics, it can get a little tiresome and feel like an excuse to increase playtime. There's enemy variants not present in the original to switch things up, which I can appreciate upon discovering them for the first time, but after that, they become pretty pointless. The Otherworld version of the lying figure just explodes into a pool of acid, which does nothing but just make things more annoying if it's in your walking path. The nurse variant just wields a knife instead of a pipe and has attacks which are weirdly easier to telegraph and they take less hits to down, so what the fuck is the point? The exception to the variants are shit rule is the spider mannequins. Best enemy in the game through and through. They're fast as fuck, hard to spot in the dark, can get you from every direction so it gives you no place to hide. It's just constant tension. You'll be frantically looking around trying to shoot them off the wall, and missing because you've been spending the whole game not shooting like me. It's amazing. But as far as the regular mannequins, by the end of the game, you'll be over their bullshit, as they tiptoe around like toddlers getting ready to jump scare you for the millionth time. Like, this is gonna be the one that gets him. Get ready to be fake scared. They're probably the only instance where expanding the game finally crosses over the threshold to being stupid. Overall, I will admit pretty much every section I caught myself thinking, holy shit, this section isn't over yet. But where this game's oversaturation rears its ugly head, an equally attractive one pushes it back behind the door and takes its place. That head being puzzles. The way the puzzles are expanded upon in this game is beautiful. Each section has a main puzzle to be solved that all get their own epic reveal cutscene to pull at your nostalgia heartstrings. The main puzzle branches out into 3 smaller puzzles or 3 areas filled with key items or enemies. I absolutely love this approach. Silent Hill 2 is known for having memorable puzzles that I never found overly challenging, but they were still very unique and creative and weird. Here we're continuing the trend with genius innovations, like the idea of a coin having 2 sides. No, but that actually got a pop for me. Every single time I discovered a new layer to a puzzle from the original, it excited me. The presentation is taken to new levels, the difficulty has been slightly increased, the original versions are honored, all is perfect. Though I will say I grew a little tired of the game reusing the counting puzzles, you know, where you're just like counting objects around the room to get the combination to a lock, and the riddle is like, Billy took 2 shits, ate 2 more vitamins than he shit, and did it at the crack of dawn minus 4 hours after he brushed his teeth. What is the combination to the lock? But anyways, all in all, how do the puzzles compare to the original? If you experience Silent Hill 2 for the first time with the remake, the puzzles in the original will likely bore the piss out of you. And the amount of frustration you get from selecting an item to use in a puzzle that requires multiple items, or rereading the directions for a riddle or puzzle multiple times, all the fading in and out of black between, will no longer be immersion building, it'll seem tedious and fucking ridiculous. This is where you don't earn points for being old, Grandpa. But let's not nail the coffin shut. Using still images to showcase things being unlocked or solved in the original just has a feel to it that's indescribable. Just watching the lock disappear, shit like that. And the remake honors it in its own shitty modern way, by doing the same thing just in real time. It also keeps the will you investigate further thing when slowly fisting holes in the wall, and the will you jump in and die thing with the holes in the floor. This remake is constantly reminding you that it loves the original just like you do, so you have to like the remake. It even has collectibles dedicated to honoring glimpses of the past with cute little jingles after you discover one. It's those little sprinkles of nostalgia seasoning that keeps things tasty for the OG purists. It makes exploration so inviting, something expanded upon quite a bit, especially in the town. From every door is locked to fuck this, I'm breaking in every window, to get inside, to see if I can find more goodies to scratch that completionist itch. That's something I wish I could say and be satisfied. But with collectibles, the game decides enough with these warm hugs I'm giving you through nostalgia, here's a nice big fuck you! Because your collectibles can't be tracked and don't carry over into New Game Plus. In order to get the trophies needed for Platinum, you need to collect them all in one single playthrough. No carryover on a save file, no chapter select, and thanks to no tracking, you have no choice but to spend an entire playthrough looking back and forth at online guides to ensure you're grabbing everything. That shit is so fucking weak and tedious. Burn in hell. Patch that open wound with a giant band-aid. What else is left? Regardless of my whining, exploration and the good old classic fetch quests for key items is still great. I don't understand how people can bitch about how getting a key item isn't satisfying enough, when it takes going through scary environments and enemy encounters to fetch it. Even though towards the end of sections I was taken back by how long it was taking, there's still a great flow to it all. Metaphorically and literally speaking, when one door closes behind you, another one opens. You won't find yourself aimlessly traveling through previously explored areas much. The game is constantly putting you on the path. Just do the classic checking every door on the map to see if you've interacted with all of them, and you're set. The remake does add breakable walls, which can sometimes create an issue with being lost, but all in all, I didn't find them to be a problem. There's good old climbing on top of dumpsters and shit in this game, see, more Last of Us influence. And the controls for when you're moving these things feel stiff and awkward. These don't really add much, except for the fact that the camera, whenever you're vaulting over the perfectly cut holes in the wall, makes it seem like an enemy encounter is about to start every time, and it never comes. I love that. It reminds me of the way tension is handled in the original. Psychological horror. But most of the time in the remake, like I said before, ditches that in favor of maximum epic and loud in-your-face tension. The hallway chase with Pyramid Head, as I suspected, now has loud explosions and debris flying everywhere, as well as quintessential character tripping for no reason tropes. The boss fights also have walls being destroyed left and right. The first Pyramid Head fight is now watch him break shit the fight. Gone are the claustrophobic fight your way out of cardboard box fights of the original. The original's boss fights are actually the closest it gets to handling tension the way the remake does throughout, just putting you in a corner and forcing itself onto you. See this how you will, but for me, this is the one instance where in terms of overcooking, you can take that toast, throw it in the fire, and dump a bucket of lighter fluid on it. Most of the boss fights in the original are tedious and annoying in comparison, and I'd like to emphasize in comparison, because I will still gladly get original Pyramid Head in an animation loop for 3 minutes any day of the week. But the remake boss fights are so much more exciting. They're faster, more fearsome, have multiple phases. The boss fights are the one area where I don't mind you taking me out of the original ambiance and instead scaring the shit out of me. It makes things like the Abstract Daddy fight and the story behind it way more impactful. Knowing the story behind it makes the fight so much more disturbing, especially considering the remake does a much better job conveying it. It takes that clip from the original theatrical intro where Angela is seen running through a hallway and builds upon it tremendously, putting you in her shoes, running away from her monster of a father as you hear voice clips of him being a subhuman piece of shit, the walls and floor falling apart and being destroyed, peeling back more and more layers till all that's left is the disgusting manifestation of Angela's trauma. It's legitimately one of the most disturbing experiences I've ever had in a video game. I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it. I commend the people behind it. Very well done. The Eddie boss fight absolutely kills the original, and using his cutscene dialogue mid-fight was a great choice. Yeah. The rest of the bosses are spectacular in how they've been expanded. There's even a boss fight for the fucking fleshlight arm monster in the hotel. That's fantastic. Anyone arguing that the final boss fight is better than the original? Pfft, stop. Epicness is the name of the game for final bosses, since the dawn of time, and the final one in the original is just like the others, anticlimactic. It's hard to shame it for that though, because it can't just forget what the game was trying to be the entire time. But when you're looking at the fight through the lens of the remake like every other boss, it's a fucking no-brainer. If you disagree, you're being dishonest. It's the area where gameplay doesn't have to lend itself solely to the theming and sacrifice fun in favor of it. And the more you deny yourself that fun, the faster you'll earn yourself a trip to Silent Hill. Okie dokie, let's quit rambling and tally up. To the gameplay versus board. The original has fixed camera angles, tank controls, and enemies are mainly used like props. It's not very action-oriented. This is good because these things lend themselves to the theming and create a more immersive psychological horror experience, as long as you lend yourself to the ride it can take you on. The remake is a ride in of itself, no deep investment required. It ditches some of the more psychological horror aspects in favor of a more action-oriented experience, third-person over-the-shoulder camera style to get you up close and personal to the enemies, who now have a personality and bully you. While the action-oriented style doesn't build upon the core theming of the story as well as the original, the remake creates its own identity in how some of its action can subtly reveal the inner goings of the mind of your main protagonist, who you will now feel more connected to. The remake in that way stays true to its own approach and does so successfully. But is that approach better than the originals? The original once again has nostalgia and simplicity on its side, but does that make for a duller and less exciting experience? The remake, convenience and innovation. It's faster, it's more comfortable, it has autosaves. But is this game an experience that ever needed these things, and do they in turn strip away its unique vibe? The original is short and effective. It makes getting new endings a quicker process to attain rather than in the remake whose runtime is doubled. The remake is heavily expanded and bloated, with more content in every field. Better boss fights, better puzzles, more exploration and collectibles, more endings, but maybe too much of an emphasis on action to the point that it becomes redundant and tedious. Okay, so when I'm looking at these perspectives, I fully understand an argument for one or the other. But if I'm looking at gameplay alone and what experience would be more exciting to tackle again on a dime, I gotta go with the remake. The original is something where after you've experienced it the first time, you've already lost a little bit of the magic the moment you choose to replay it again. It's also a game that thrives on getting yourself into a mindset and immersing yourself in it. Something I do love doing, but sometimes mindless violence is the break my brain needs. The expanded puzzles, like I said, make the originals feel like an afterthought. Doesn't mean that I feel a lot of the charm of them is lost in the remake, but I'm much more excited to tackle them on hard difficulty than I am in the original. I can't imagine guessing wrong on the coin puzzle on hard in the original like a bunch of times and getting a headache from all the screen transitions. Also, the idea of trying to survive the action on hard in the remake where I've already struggled at times on normal is another driving factor as to why I'd say it wins in the gameplay category for me. Playing on hard action mode in the original with no autosaves just sounds like a recipe for rage and annoyance. But anyways, we're 1-1. But who's gonna take the gold? It's time for atmosphere, graphics, sound design, music. My personal favorite category, because it's the easiest. Put me on the outskirts of Silent Hill with some of that glorious OST playing right now, and get me out of this video. Rambling on about thoughts I could weed down to less than a minute is hard work. It's like someone groping around inside my skull, winding up my brain over and over without some time in rest mode. But nevertheless, atmosphere, sound design, graphics, music, whatever. You know, it's crazy how you can take any category and argue for why it's the glue that holds everything together. Because it's the truth. Every category of Silent Hill 2 is drowning in adhesive white liquid. The pages of an amazing book beautifully stuck together. Well, I guess that makes no sense because then how the hell do you read it? But the joke is stuck to the script and it's not coming off. Music. I talked about it in my timeless masterpiece Silent Hill 2 vid. I'm not going to have a giant monologue about it now. It's fantastic. I listen to it literally on the daily. It helps give the game its unique personality and once again lends itself to the theming. The music in the remake is remade and remastered by the legend himself, Akira Yamaoka. So naturally, it's still amazing. There's new arrangements for original tracks like White Noise in the intro, which Mary not reading her letter to is still unforgivable, but I digress. The new arrangements are still cool. There's also added ambiance tracks for certain areas in the game, like every main puzzle has its own ambient track for the room it's in, which is nice. Love the coin puzzle one. Overall, I like the original soundtrack more, for the old school vibe. I don't know, it's more like laid back and dark and muffled. The only way I can describe my reasoning is go and listen to both versions of Null Moon, then don't get back to me, just understand my bias and leave me alone. But still, both soundtracks are kick-ass in their own right, and the only reason why I can say fuck the remake OST is because those final 3 notes in Magdalene, the piano track that plays in Maria's first death when James is in the elevator, are absent. It could play into the whole time loop aspect that the remake leans into, and I respect that, but it warrants an L for how I was sitting patiently waiting for the and it never came. That's one monster I want to finally show up instead of just tickling my musical-loving taint for minutes on end. Graphics, another fucking easy L for the original. How the hell could you argue that pixelated nostalgia objectively triumphs over shiny and new here? Well, I guess you could say the cutscenes are way more eerie and do a much better job at setting a unique vibe, but it's easier for me right now to just look at these games as a whole and say, looking pretty wins. Sorry, Eddie. The remake is gorgeous. The fog is more foggier than ever. The environments and iconic landmarks are brought more to life. Disgusting shit looks more disgusting. Rust and wear look more realistic. Characters are hot now. Even arms stay dirty after sticking them in poopy water. All is perfect. The use of lighting here is fucking masterful. I have not seen a more straight out of a big budget film shot than just standing in a hospital hallway in this game and watching a nurse walk down it. The enemies are brimming with detail and look all the more disturbing. etc., etc., etc. The game looking better is no question, leaves no room for a massive debate that'll just be about personal bias. The real doggy bone of contention worth growling about is the presentation of each game through their overall sound design and atmosphere. This is something that makes the original, and I'm glad that the remake has such a strong emphasis on it. But just like the gameplay, they take it in an entirely different direction. The way I've always described Silent Hill 2 and its ambiance is it puts you in a relatively harmless world that doesn't seem harmless. It lets you sit in it and think about its eerie nature that doesn't scream "I'm scary," yet offers sprinkles of dark introspective viewpoints, not just directly through written word and notes and shit, but through the environment as a whole and how your protagonist behaves in it. You'll see James doing something and you'll question, why is he doing this, even though you're the one initiating it. The robotic nature that comes with old school games makes James seem all the more emotionless, which will make you think what's really going on in his head. There are moments throughout the game that completely lack any sound other than your footsteps and opening doors. Again, it gives you room to think about what situation you're in, rather than giving you a situation to think about, if that makes sense. The remake, for the most part, does the exact opposite of everything I said, and is a hill that is far from fucking silent. In the remake, while they stay true to some of the original method of tension building and environmental storytelling, it often becomes overshadowed by how much things are screaming in your face, and it increases throughout the game. If you don't like loud noises and shit jumping out at you, this game will feel like a mockery of a classic. But the problem is, it's done well. The remake takes the idea of James plunging into the deep depths of his dark psyche to manifest fucked up shit to the umpteenth degree. It can get pretty comical when the atmosphere and sound design are deliberately throwing more and more loud and gross shit to unsettle or startle you. It's like Patrick saying, look at it, I want all of you to look at it. This game pulls out all the stops, millions of bugs, jump scares, loud bangs, doors shutting behind you, screaming, alarms and sirens, red lights, flashing lights, enemies choking on their own vomit, dead bodies, blood and body parts, bubbling mold liquid. It's all here. And for the most part, it's done better than most horror games I've played. The Toluca prison and labyrinth sections are legit some of the most uncomfortable horror environments I've ever been in. I was so anxious it sucked the completionist right out of me. I was like, just get me the fuck out of here, fuck exploring. The closest I can think of to being that anxious are only in first-person horror games like Amnesia or Outlast, maybe Soma, which by default are more scary because of the camera style. So I can easily say this is probably the scariest third-person horror game I've ever played. Well, that seems like a positive note to end on. How about I just get out some final thoughts on things and wrap this up? I just want to gush about how good the sound design for the spider mannequins is. Hearing them crawl around, as well as hearing that "I'm gonna get you" music start to build, is fucking terrifying and gets an A+. The children/women screaming sound effect that comes from them, though, is kind of a C-. The fleshlight monster sounds are great as well, A+. Maria/Mary's monster transformation at the end of the game is literally perfect, A+++, triple S smokin' sexy style. And the transition from dark to light on the rooftop with the ladder was genius. The menu sounds are decent in the remake, but they don't hold a candle to the original. I also miss my sweet map ASMR sound from the original. The radio is cooler in the remake, almost sounds like a monster. Anyone bitching about the cinematography or lack thereof in the remake can suck it. Are we playing the same game? Quite frankly, some of the new ways scenes are shot are the only thing saving them from just being poor rip-offs of the original, like the Maria Labyrinth cutscene or the Angela scene with the mirror. Sure, there are shots I wish they brought back that just aren't as satisfying in the remake, like the way Maria's intro cutscene is shot. Eddie's pre-boss fight cutscene was better with more camera cuts and close-ups, and having Laura up in your face instead of the wide shot in the hotel just irks me, and leans a little too hard into the whole putting us in James's shoes thing. But overall, this game does enough to change things up in an exciting way that doesn't warrant calling it a disaster in this department. But does it do enough in this category as a whole to call it better than the original? Let's head to the versus board one last time to find out. So when it comes to graphics, atmosphere, music, sound design, I need to think of a better name for this category. The original again has that pixelated nostalgic charm that can help with the eerie and weird theming that's present throughout. Old horror games have an edge in that because they don't look hyper-realistic, they're creepier. The remake is a breathtaking reskin that brings the environments from the original to life. It helps showcase character emotion, make gross things look grosser, make shit look all the more realistic, yada yada yada. It helps humanize characters, and because shit is real looking, it can help transport you into the world better than an old game can. Both the original and remake have fantastic soundtracks. The original is full-on psychological horror in how it approaches tension. It focuses almost exclusively on what could be rather than what is, and does so in a predominantly quiet and subtle way. The remake retains some of this style, but opts for a more in-your-face approach, trying to stimulate you with jump scares, a lot more loud noises, set pieces, etc., etc. Overall, leading to a more eventful experience. But does that translate to a better experience overall? I'm not going to hold my tongue any longer. I just can't within good conscience argue that Silent Hill 2 is better served as a haunted house. If you ever forgot throughout the course of your playthrough that the makers of Layers of Fear made this game, then this clip has got you. For me, this is definitely some black spots on the still tasty burnt toast here. But yes, the original wins the category. Check. In terms of overall thoughts, everything again just goes back to the toast. The overcooking. There are times when shit is just a tad too over the top. Still brilliant, but a tad too overstimulating when Silent Hill 2 just translates much better when it's toned down. But I understand those who disagree and why. It's like someone preferring movies over reading, showing you things versus letting your imagination have some responsibility. But I feel that in the case of Silent Hill 2, there's just something more eerie about the story and setting when you're blinded in all aspects. An intriguingly weird-looking painting rather than a fireworks show of constant stimulation. The remake is just too loud and explosive, too in plain sight for a game that thrived in how it blinded and confused me. The world doesn't appear harmless at all. It feels like a threat. Because this ain't an old game, James isn't a robot and reacts to his environment frequently. It takes you out of that observational perspective and makes you wonder less and worry more. You won't question why James is doing weird shit like fisting and jumping into holes. You expect him to do so, because it seems like a method of survival. He seems like a helpless victim of the town and monsters, and it doesn't translate as well into the cutscenes. You could say it makes it all the more weird that James isn't out of breath in cutscenes, or weird that he's not talking about the dozens of monsters he just slaughtered, but I don't care. The remake creates a world and vibe that's a little bit more concrete than the original, so I don't consider a lack of consistency with gameplay and cutscenes to be a strategy to make things seem spookier. To go back to what I said about the original in terms of thinking about the current situation you're in, the remake gives you situations to think about. It creates problems for you left and right and doesn't give you very much room to breathe. And this is a great aspect of the game when it comes to gameplay and the tension that comes with trying to read the map during combat, chase sequences being more adrenaline-inducing, moments of quiet having you on edge hoping you don't get jump scared. But when it comes to story and ambiance, it just becomes a case of less things clicking to create a unique masterpiece and more things that are fun but don't merge as well together. Either or, Silent Hill 2 in either version is a delicious flavor-packed game pizza. But how can I sit here and eat it if it's too full of monsters? That would make me a gluttonous pig. But still, I can't help myself but honor the remake's overcooking by overcooking my generosity with my final verdict. Silent Hill 2 Remake is the better game. But Silent Hill 2 is the better Silent Hill 2. The original wins. If you like this, leave a like, comment, and perhaps subscribe, and I just might make some more.